some kind of licensing where you'd seen it in the last 6 months, you don't have to watch it again. Is that
provide a piece of paper?
Yeah.
I've seen this 5 times. I'm thoroughly acquainted with it.
Yeah. Is it okay if I just read my book?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like Lord of the Rings. You know, you'll always see something you didn't see before, and it could be that really important thing. You never know.
Okay.
Please don't stand up during the plane taking off.
Yeah. Who did that? Who does that?
I know. Oh, well, it happened, obviously.
A thrill seeker.
The Pedestrian Council of Australia wants fines for people distracted while walking across the road on their cell phones, usually. There's a study out of Seattle that shows 1 out of every 3 people uses a smartphone while crossing the road. Would you like to see distracted pedestrians fined? Do you wonder who would fine them?
It actually does make sense, to be honest, because it is dangerous if you're crossing a road and not. I've seen it, not people not paying attention because they're so focused on their phone. I've probably done it. I don't think crossing the road though. Hell, fine them. Why not?
That's bizarre. What are you going to do? You're going to have people that walk around the streets looking for distracted pedestrians, and then you're going to have an argument about the degree of distraction.
I've lost all respect for you since you poo-pooed my tranquilizer idea.
I know people who think that they can do 5 things at once, and they would argue that they weren't distracted. Their peripheral vision was such that they could see the entire street. I mean, I think that's just a hornet's nest, isn't it?
Yeah, it's probably unenforceable. Yeah, you're probably right, but it's probably it might be good to have signs. There we go. Here's a compromise. Have signs. Big sign with a
get off your phone.
Red line through you walking across the pedestrian crossing on a cell phone.
How about some common sense? And the fine is you get hit by a car. I mean, seriously.
The thing is that ends up costing the taxpayer.
People actually do walk distracted. 2 of them, eerily enough, on Nelson Street coming off the motorways this morning, both on their phones, I think, and simply oblivious, walking across that motorway.
Oh, it will happen. If it hasn't happened already, someone will get wiped out and it'll make the news.
What do you think of this idea out of the UK? Police numbers are dwindling there. And according to their media, regional communities have taken to organising their own crime-fighting initiatives. In New Scientist, the UK police want to predict serious violent crime using artificial intelligence. And the idea is that individuals who would be red flagged by social workers or health workers would be offered interventions like counselling to avert potential criminal behaviour.
Is this like they come into your house, look, you've been doing this and this and this, and we think you're about to commit a crime, or is it outside a bar at closing time at 1 o'clock in the morning, you're about to commit a crime? Do we know the difference? Which one it is?
All of that, wouldn't it?
It could be all of that, because they would simply look at a checklist and a minority report kind of precognition way and decide whether you were up for more serious crime.
Oh, we'll just wait outside a drunken bar in England when it empties out. You'll see plenty of people about to commit crimes there.
But that's the thin edge of the wedge, isn't it, too? Where do you start and where do you finish in monitoring people? And what is it that suggests that you had a right to monitor them in the first place? Yeah, I think that's
it opens up, all sorts of things for, racial profiling and socioeconomic profiling and that again.
Is there just badness, as well as goodness, pure and simple in people, and you just can't wish it away? You can't counsel it away?
Oh, you can provide environments that are less likely for it to occur, like chucking out a whole lot of young men full of alcohol onto a street in the middle of the night. Oh. That's more likely to have a crime if that's the case.
Ooh.
I'd like to thank you both for your company. I'd like to introduce the Wellington Ukulele Orchestra's version on your behalf. Ali Jones, thank you very much for being on the panel today.
Thank you. It was lovely to be here.
Andrew Clay, always a pleasure.
Likewise, Jim.
Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. Oh, we didn't get much of it. Got a wee bit.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, Housing New Zealand tenants kicked to the curb due to bogus meth tests are on the cusp of getting compensation. Why has it taken so long to get what they're owed, and why doesn't the government want to talk about it? It's time to turn the tap down, or better still, off in Oamaru. Residents are warned to stop watering plants, washing cars and even doing dishes, or the town may run dry over the weekend. And millions of dollars for billions of trees. Shane Jones throws more money around, but he gets a dressing down. Find out why. And another mass whale stranding, this time in the Chatham Islands. And don't forget, you can watch us on Face TV Sky Channel 83. But first, the news.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The controversial Waimea Dam project has finally got the go-ahead. At a marathon meeting today, Tasman District Councillors voted 9-5 in favour of it. The vote, which caps almost 2 decades of planning, secures government funding through Crown Irrigation Investment and the Freshwater Improvement Fund. Deputy Mayor Tim King, who's been on the council since the project was first mooted 17 years ago, says it's a model for the future, whereby large cost projects will require input from private enterprise, government and iwi.
That is the only way we're going to be able to confront and solve the never-ending list of issues that are going to make this issue, despite the fact that at the moment it is the single biggest thing we've ever confronted, it will not be the biggest thing we confront in the future.
Tasman's Deputy Mayor Tim King. The Commerce Minister is seeking advice on allegations of bullying behaviour by the Retirement Commissioner. Chris Farfoy was told on Tuesday about the anonymous claim, which the Commissioner, Diane Maxwell, rejects. Here's our political reporter Joe Moyer.
Ms Maxwell says she demands high standards, and while her leadership style is clear and direct, she also has a strong and fundamental sense of fairness and empathy. She was given mixed feedback from Human Resources after some staff chose to leave the Commission. She's been in the role 5.5 years. Several months ago, Mr Farfoy asked her about high staff turnover, which she says she has addressed in detail. In June next year, Ms Maxwell will complete her second term as Commissioner, at which point Mr Farfoy says it's appropriate to consider other applicants. He says 2 weeks ago he told Ms Maxwell he plans to do so. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
There's been another mass whale stranding, this time in the Chatham Islands. Between 80 and 90 were stranded at Hanson Bay last night, and although up to 40 refloated themselves by the time dock staff arrived, all but one of the remaining 51 were dead and it later had to be euthanised. The other whales appear to have gone out to sea and have not been seen since the morning. 145 pilot whales stranded and died on Stewart Island on Monday, and 10 pygmy whales stranded on 90 Mile Beach in Northland on Sunday. A dock spokesperson, Dave Carlton, says it's not understood why whales and dolphins strand. The Transport Agency has suspended 2 more Auckland vehicle inspectors over dodgy warrants of fitness, jet tyres and wheel alignment, and one employee at Onehunga's Church Street Motors and Tyres were served suspension notices this afternoon. The agency says more than 5,000 vehicle owners will be affected. It found the Onehunga employee was non-compliant in almost every area of his technical inspections. The American founder of the Me Too movement says the campaign against sexual violence she began more than a decade ago has become unrecognisable to her. Tarana Burke says the media have framed it as a witch hunt and a vindictive plot against men. She says the campaign is now neglecting the survivors of sexual violence it was set up to help. Speaking at a TED Women's Conference in Palm Springs, Ms Burke says she's keen to get back to the original intention she had for Me Too in 2006. Oamaru residents may have to start boiling water if enough town supply water is not conserved over the weekend. Full water restrictions have been imposed on the North Otago town and surrounding areas. The Waitaki District Council says the supply may run out in 2 days if the restrictions are not observed. The council's asset group manager Neil Jorgensen says that could have a big impact.
If we do run out of treated water, we will still supply water. It will just be untreated, which would mean we'd need to put a boil water notice in place, and then everyone would need to boil water before using it, which would have a major effect on businesses. And well, we've got some quite major businesses that use water, the Canterbury Wool Spinners and Oamaru Meats.
Neil Jorgensen of the Waitaki District Council there. One of Auckland's best-known camping grounds may have to shut down. An Auckland Council report on floods in February and April has found the Piha Domain camp land to be unsafe and says future floods could result in loss of life. Fiona Anderson, who has managed the camp for 19 years, says she has no choice but to remove all the cabins and caravans and she'll no longer be able to insure the site. It's not clear whether people will still be able to put up tents. Residents of Opito Bay near Kerikeri have been devastated by the discovery that someone has killed their beachfront pohutikawa. An arborist has confirmed that holes were drilled in the roots of the trees and have been poisoned. Yvonne Sharp, whose grandfather planted the row in the 1960s, says for decades families have played and picnicked under the trees and it's beyond belief that anyone would harm them.
You know, we're the closest beach to Kerikeri, and the families that come down here, you know, mums and dads and kids today, we've got 2 school groups down here, and on a sunny day those trees are just absolutely invaluable. The fact that now they're going to end up as skeletons is just awful.
Sharp says she hopes the council will replace the dying trees with new ones. It's 5:05. On to sport this afternoon. With Olympic qualification on the line this season, the All Black Sevens coach Clark Laidlaw says a strong start at tonight's opening World Series tournament in Dubai is imperative. New Zealand were runners-up at the tournament last year before finishing third overall in the series. The top 4 teams will qualify for the 2020 Tokyo Games. Laidlaw says making the semi-finals or better of every tournament is their goal as they look to reclaim the World Series title they haven't won in 4 years.
Top 4 is the aim for all 15 teams, and I think realistically you could probably argue 12 or 13 of those teams could make that top 4. So we feel this tournament will be pretty intense. So we need to start well. Making semi-finals and finals is the way to try and win the World Series. And last year, as you say, we got off to a really good start. So if we could replicate that, with a couple of finals in these first 2 weeks, that'd be great.
New Zealand play Wales, Spain and USA in pool play. 3 days after confirming they had let him go, Formula One team Toro Rosso have released a statement thanking the New Zealand driver Brendan Hartley. Toro Rosso confirmed on Tuesday he was being replaced by the Thai driver Alexander Albon. After being criticised for initially acknowledging Hartley only with a short social media message, the team this morning released a more substantial statement saying he'd been a key part of the team and played an important role in the development of their partnership with engine manufacturer Honda. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life goes on an organic orchard audit. Brooke Fraser is our Friday Night Live act. We are looking forward to Oamaru this weekend. It's a sports thing, and because the country elected its first national government on this day in 1949, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to Conservatives because there is no alternative. Tonight's with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now from Met Service heading into the weekend through to midnight tomorrow Saturday. Northland to Waitomo, that includes Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taumarunui and Taupo. A few showers turning to rain with heavy falls from the north in Northland this afternoon and from Auckland southeastwards tomorrow morning. Possible thunderstorms for Northland tomorrow. Taranaki to Manawatu, also Taihape, Gisborne and Wairarapa. Cloudy with a few showers, some heavy inland. Horowhenua through to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough, a few showers, some heavy this afternoon. Canterbury and Eastern Otago mainly fine, but low cloud and patchy drizzle morning and night. Afternoon showers about Canterbury High Country, some heavy tomorrow. Southland and the rest of Otago, cloudy periods, showers during the afternoons and evenings, and some heavy with isolated thunderstorms. Localised downpours are possible today. Fiordland, cloudy periods, rain developing this evening, easing to isolated showers tomorrow afternoon. At the Chathams, cloudy periods. And that's the news.
It is 7 after 5. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The first State House tenants kicked out of their homes due to flawed meth testing are about to have their compensation claims paid out. A regulation change was needed before any beneficiaries could receive payments to ensure that the payouts don't result in people's benefits being cut. The change was signed off by Cabinet on Monday, but it has taken 4 days for Housing New Zealand to confirm that to Checkpoint, as the Housing Minister Phil Twyford didn't want to speak about it until next week. 800 tenants could be eligible for several $1,000s each in compensation after being evicted between 2013 and this year due to the flawed testing. Now, Michelle Cook has been following this story and filed this report.
Lima and Pauline Herbert and their 3 young grandchildren were kicked out of their Housing New Zealand home in 2016 after traces of methamphetamine were found on the property. Scared their belongings were contaminated, as suggested on the test report HNZ ordered, the family threw everything out. Now they want $15,000 in compensation, and HNZ told Mr Herbert this week that's exactly the figure he'll get. Mr Herbert says the Crown Agency relied on him to be honest when deciding on the compensation figure.
I know if you were dealing with an insurance company, they would want receipts, they would want proof of purchase and all these sorts of things. In terms of what happened here, to me, they didn't ask for any proof of, any of the furniture and stuff. How they assessed it was on the size of your property.
Mr Herbert's compensation is significantly more than the initial average estimate given by Housing New Zealand, which estimated tenants would be reimbursed between $2,500 and $3,000 each. Mr Herbert says while he's been upfront from the beginning, others could try to make false claims.
There are going to be obviously people who are going to try and take advantage. I don't know, but yeah, I was just thankful that I got a good result. I put it down to being upfront, being honest.
While Mr Herbert has accepted the offer and at least one other claim was finalised last week, the regulation change needed to go ahead before anyone could receive any money.
We're going to fix the problem pretty quickly. It's going to take a change to regulations. It doesn't need a legislation change in the Parliament. It can be simply taken through Cabinet and dealt with by order in Council. The point I want to make, though, is that this issue has not and will not cause any delay to the compensation payments.
That was Housing Minister Phil Twyford exactly 1 month ago, just a week after learning a regulation change was needed. But the Minister has refused to tell us when the change was scheduled to go ahead, and HNZ also repeatedly refused to tell us for 4 days until they confirmed it this afternoon. And while Mr Herbert has been told he should receive his money in the next 2 weeks, for him the payout is the final chapter of a saga that should have never happened in the first place.
Well, it's a relief actually, knowing that it's over and we can move on with our lives, not having any anything coming back from what happened to us 2 years ago. So yeah, I'm thankful that it's over.
Mr Herbert plans to use some of his payout towards furniture he bought on hire purchase to replace the items he threw out, but most of the money will be spent on his grandchildren. Hopefully, he says, in time for Christmas. For Checkpoint, Michelle Cook.
The agency's website lists 4 cases as having been completed, but Housing New Zealand says only one of those is for compensation, while 3 cases were where people had simply asked questions which were answered. The website also states 130 cases have been approved, a jump from 116 in progress last week, but it's not clear how many of those are claims for compensation either. We hope to provide you with some more details about this, but both Minister Phil Twyford and Housing New Zealand refused to talk to Checkpoint for this story. Claims tonight that an Auckland garage that issues WAFs has not been inspected by the Transport Agency in more than a decade. Figures released to Checkpoint reveal there are just 20 NZTA compliance officers responsible for checking up on about 12,000 garages or people authorised to issue warrants. A back-of-the-envelope calculation puts their average caseload at around 600, meaning if they spend just 1 working day on each, it could take well over 2 years for them to get around them all. Not good enough, says Motor Trade Association boss Craig Pomare.
It's a ratio that means, unfortunately, inspectors aren't inspected themselves as often as they should be. The resource levels they need are significantly higher than that to make sure that we can stay close to and on top of our inspector network of 12,000. They actually physically need more people in there. We understand they're looking to employ a large number of additional auditors, but the issue we have there, Lisa, is one of them trying to find those people at the moment in an industry that's already struggling to find qualified automotive technicians.
They are recruiting for 17 certification staff and 2 additional heavy vehicle specialist certifiers. How challenging is that going to be, do you think, in the current labour market?
Well, firstly, we're delighted that they are looking to find extra people, but it will be very challenging. A survey of our membership in 2017 showed that there is a gap in the market of about 2,000 qualified automotive technicians. Now, we assume that NZTA will probably be looking to draw from the same pool of qualified people. So at the same time they're trying to find them, our own businesses are also trying to find qualified technicians. So we think it will be a significant challenge. We have, through some work we did, though, in 2017, got ourselves back on the skills shortage list to help our businesses recruit, and that will also help NZTA potentially.
What are your members telling you about how often they see a compliance officer?
We've had a range of responses to that question. We've had some members that haven't been seen for 3 to 4 to 5 years. And the most extreme example that we've had is a member based in Auckland who hasn't been seen for 12 years. Now, we haven't asked every member what their experience is, so there may be some greater than that, but largely what we're hearing is in the 3 to 5 year range since they were last audited.
Letting businesses go 3, 4, 5 years without a checkup, in essence, that has got to be dangerous, doesn't it?
Lisa, we agree. It's not acceptable that our inspectors should not be seen sooner than 3 to 5 years, or in some cases longer than that. It's important that the regulator is in there making sure they're doing a great job, and they need to do that regularly. That might be once a year, I think, would be a great start point, just to reset the bar for everybody. Because an inspector knowing that the regulator is coming in, it creates an atmosphere of them making sure they're doing their very best all the time. But knowing that someone's not going to come in for some period of time, unfortunately that means in some cases, as we've seen, some people choose to take shortcuts, which we find to be devastating.
Do you maintain confidence in the New Zealand Transport Agency?
In terms of their inspection and auditing process at the moment, we do not. We are looking forward to the changes that they are proposing to that. They must move quickly. They must get extra people on the ground because they need to restore confidence both amongst the inspectors themselves and also the general public.
How serious is that you have lost confidence in a fundamental part of their business, which is to keep Kiwis safe, and that is through warrant of fitnesses? You've lost confidence in that process. How serious is that?
For us, as one of the largest inspecting groups in the country, that is a serious thing. We want to see them move quickly to restore that confidence by getting good people on the ground, getting them on the ground quickly, and getting those processes in place which mean that we can feel confident in that system again.
How long are you going to give them?
We would love them to have this in place early in the new year. Their challenge will be finding people in the first instance. As I shared earlier, there's a significant gap in the market for the people they're looking for and our industry's looking for. So the sooner they can move, the better.
And what if they can't get it together within that time frame? What happens then?
That then becomes an issue for the Minister and for the NZTA board to deal with at that time.
But will you be making your feelings known to both the Minister and the board if you do not see change fast enough?
Oh, very much so. And we plan to have to be communicating with both this side of Christmas to put our concerns in writing to them.
And we did invite Fergus Gamby, the boss of NZTA, onto the show again. He has declined to be interviewed by me. The other thing is, if you want to send us feedback on any of the stories that you're listening or watching this evening, get in touch, 2101 on the text, or you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We'd love to hear from you. There has been another mass whale stranding, this time in the Chatham Islands. Up to 90 pilot whales were stranded last night at Hanson Bay, but up to 40 were able to refloat themselves. When the Department of Conservation arrived, all but one of the 51 remaining whales were dead. Another had to be euthanased. Dave Carlton of DOC says today has been a long one.
We got a call last night at about 6:30 Chatham Islands time to say that there was a mass stranding of pilot whales out at Oamaru in front of some houses out there. So we went out and had a bit of a look, and sure enough, there was roughly about 50 pilot whales on the beach and on the rocks around there as well, with about another 30 or so threatening to beach. Because it was sort of getting on dark, there was a lot of blood in the water from the rocks. The shark risk was great. There's not much more we could do last night, so we basically went back out there first thing this morning. And luckily some of the whales must have swum off in the night, and we were left with 50 on the beach. Of those, most of them, or almost all of them, were dead. There was just one that we felt we had to put down. It was too far up to refloat and in a very bad condition. So we basically spent the day taking the whales and disposing of them.
So did you bury them, David? Do you bury them, or what do you do?
Yeah, in this case we did, because they've come up in front of a whole pile of houses there. That's a significant biohazard for the local community. Obviously that's not ideal, particularly, they take many weeks to sort of break down and become very toxic.
That's a lot of whales. A lot of whales to deal with. Who did you have helping you and how long did it take?
Yeah, well, the local community out of Owing is pretty amazing, actually. And, so a couple of locals there turned up with a bulldozer and a digger, and also managed to find a space in a paddock where we could dig a big trench. And so, we basically spent the day, moving the pilot whales from the beaches and the rock platforms out to the trench site, and it actually went really well. I thought we were going to be out there for a couple of days, but we've managed to actually get the whole thing done by this afternoon. So
did the local iwi take away any part of the whales at all?
Not from pilot whales. There's not really anything on them that's worth taking. The teeth are very small, and the bones aren't really sort of big enough for carving either. So pilot whales we just tend to dispose of.
David, any clues as to what happened here? Why they came ashore?
No. It's it's one of those enduring mysteries that no one really knows why whales do it. There's a number of theories out there. One of the most more common ones is that the low sloping sort of beaches confuse their sonar, but these ones actually came up in quite a rocky bay, so it doesn't fit with that theory. So no, it's really anyone's guess.
There's been a few strandings so far. I mean, have you got any thoughts on how many more we might expect over the summer?
Oh, I wouldn't want to jinx it. Obviously, for the Chathams, it is a whale stranding hotspot. So, we do see whales on a reasonably regular basis. We haven't had one of this size for a little while, but it is quite common to at least get one or two stranded, somewhere around the island on sort of a 2-monthly sort of basis, really.
I suppose it kind of creates a dilemma because these are beautiful, majestic creatures, and our instinct is to try and save them and put a lot of effort into trying and save them. But there is a school of thought that is that we should leave them because this is what they're doing naturally of their own accord. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, the welfare of the animals is also very important. If an animal's or whale's been up on a beach for quite some time and it's a hot day, it's an outgoing tide, you've got an animal there that really can't support its weight out of water. It's also designed to have a lot of, to keep cool by being in the ocean all the time, and yet it's with black skin in the hot beach. So they actually start to heat up and cook from the inside. So in a lot of those sorts of situations, just euthanizing them as soon as you can is actually the best thing for the animals.
And that is Dave Carlton of DOC. As he mentioned, he spent the afternoon with the help of locals and a digger burying about 50 whales that had stranded and died. A bombshell admission in court by Donald Trump's former personal lawyer has increased the pressure again for the president over suspected ties between his presidential campaign and Russia. Michael Cohen has pleaded guilty to making false statements to Congress over a deal to build a Trump Tower in Moscow with a penthouse apartment that the Washington rumour mill was suggesting could have been gifted to Russian President Vladimir Putin. And Mr. Cohen's statements have provoked a stinging rebuke from the president as he heads for the G20 meeting in Argentina over the weekend. CNN White House correspondent Jim Acosta has this report.
President Trump's former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen has left his old boss in a fix. Leaving for the G20 summit, the president lashed out at Cohen's decision to plead guilty to lying to Congress about Mr. Trump's business dealings in Moscow.
He's a weak person, and what he's trying to do is get a reduced sentence. So he's lying very simply to get a reduced sentence, okay?
Cohen admitted to the special counsel's office that his discussions with Mr. Trump about a possible real estate project in Moscow lasted until at least June 2016, well into the campaign, and 5 months longer than what he told Congress. The president's outside lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, blasted Cohen in a statement saying, "Michael Cohen is a liar. It's no surprise that Cohen lied to Congress. It is hardly coincidental that the special counsel once again files a charge just as the president is leaving for a meeting with world leaders at the G20 summit in Argentina. With regard to the hotel proposal in Moscow, the president has been completely open and transparent. Giuliani, it should be noted, has praised Cohen in the past.
He doesn't have any incriminating evidence about the president or himself. The man is an honest, honorable lawyer.
The president insisted to reporters he's been very open about the Moscow Trump Tower project.
So he's lying about a project that everybody knew about. I mean, we were very open with it. We were thinking about building a building. I guess we had in a form, it was an option. I don't know what you'd call it. I decided ultimately not to do it. There would have been nothing wrong if I did do it.
But that's not quite true. The Trump-Moscow project only became public knowledge in February of last year when it appeared in a story in the New York Times. The new revelations from Cohen also run counter to what the president said about his dealings with Russia just days before he was sworn into office.
I have no dealings with Russia. I have no deals in Russia. I have no deals that could happen in Russia because we've stayed away.
Still, the president maintains he's not worried about what else Cohen may share with prosecutors.
Not at all. I'm not worried at all about him.
Democrats disagree.
I guess we shouldn't be totally surprised at this. This is one more example of a close ally or an affiliate of Donald Trump lying about their ties or conversations with Russia or Russians.
The president left for the G20 with plans to sit down with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but Mr. Trump scrapped the meeting after speaking with advisors about Russia's recent aggression against Ukraine, tweeting, "I've decided it would be best for all parties concerned to cancel my previously scheduled meeting in Argentina with President Vladimir Putin." The tweet came less than an hour after the president indicated the meeting was still on.
I think it's a very good time to have the meeting. I'm getting a full report on the plane as to what happened with respect to that. And that will determine what I'm going to be doing.
As for the Russia investigation, the president said there was one other former aide facing legal jeopardy who's also on his mind, Paul Manafort. Mr. Trump confirmed he hasn't ruled out a pardon for his former campaign chairman.
I've never seen anybody treated so poorly.
The president made it clear when it comes to Cohen, loyalty counts.
If Cohen is such a bum, why did you hire him, have him on your payroll for 12 years, and have him do so much of your dirty work?
Because a long time ago, he did me a favor. A long time ago, he did me a favor.
And that was Donald Trump ending that report. He's now arrived in Buenos Aires for the G20 summit. Turn off the taps. The Waitaki District Council is pleading with Oamaru residents to conserve water as the town's supply runs dangerously low. The council says it sent the message on Wednesday to conserve water, but residents didn't heed the call. And as a result, full restrictions are in place. But as our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown found out, many didn't get the message.
Are you aware of the issues with the water supply at the moment?
Yes, I read in the Otago Daily this morning that we were to conserve water.
Yeah.
Because things weren't that good.
Yeah. And do you know how bad the situation is?
No, not really. No. Well, I only found out about it this morning when I read the paper, the ODT.
I saw it on social media, but I think a lot of people are unaware of it.
Those are everyday Oamaru residents who said they had no idea just how bad things were in the town. Waitaki District Council's Neil Jorgensen says things are now critical, with the town supply storage tank at only about a fifth of capacity.
Over the last couple of days, we're actually going backwards, and we now have about, if we carry on using water at the same rate, we would run out of treated water in about 2 days' time.
Mr. Jorgensen says residents shouldn't use water for washing clothes, dishes and cars. They shouldn't water their plants, and when it comes to flushing the toilet, if it's yellow, let it mellow. He says recent heavy downpours left the reservoir 3 times more turbid than ever, meaning bottled water supplies have been in high demand. We visited a supermarket with only a few bottles left on special, and the more expensive brands, bottled in glass, remaining. If water isn't conserved, the treated supply will run out, and residents will be left with that turbid reservoir water, which has to be boiled.
We're very confident that if everyone can do their part, that we will definitely avoid that situation.
Mr. Jorgensen says the council sent the message out on Wednesday and the results appeared to be good. But locals around the town say that message hasn't filtered down to them, and the council really needs to stress how bad the situation is. Some say the first information on what they needed to do came through talking to Checkpoint.
Well, I'm pleased I stopped and you talked to me, otherwise I would still know nothing. If they put it out on Wednesday, I found out in the paper this morning and also on Facebook this morning. So that's 2 days, isn't it? Wednesday to Friday. Yes. So no, I don't think they did a very good job.
And so when did you find out that there was this issue with the water levels?
Just this morning.
Only this morning?
Yep.
Yep, okay.
And as I drove to town, I saw a man washing his car, and I felt like stopping and making sure he knew. He obviously didn't.
Holly Deed, the duty manager at Fat Sally's pub and restaurant, says she is unsure what the conserve water notice will mean for businesses in the town.
As we get busier in the evenings and things, it may become a bit of an issue. So, you know, giving people free water is something we have to offer, and if we have to stop, you know, using water, then that will be an issue for us.
She says the restrictions may force them to turn customers away. In Oamaru, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Coming up, serious flooding earlier this year puts the future of one of Auckland's most iconic campgrounds in doubt. The government pledges more money for trees, and an historic viaduct reopens in Fiordland. We would love to hear your feedback. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. You can share your water saving tips. Paul Brennan has been sharing his, some of them very unpalatable, but here he is with the headlines.
We won't go into that. And now the headlines, as you say. Tasman Deputy Mayor Tim King says the Waimea Dam is a model for the future, whereby big-ticket projects will need input from private enterprise, government and iwi. After a marathon meeting today, Tasman District Council has voted 9-5 in favour of the controversial dam. The vote, which caps 17 years of planning, will have government funding through Crown Irrigation Investment and the Freshwater Improvement Fund. The Commerce Minister is seeking advice on allegations of bullying by the Retirement Commissioner Diane Maxwell. Chris Farfoy was told on Tuesday about the anonymous claim, which the Commissioner rejects. He says Ms Maxwell's second term as Commissioner ends in June and other applicants will be considered for the role. 50 pilot whales have died after another mass stranding overnight, this time in the Chatham Islands. Another 40 refloated themselves and appear to have gone out to sea. On Sunday, 10 pygmy whales stranded on 90 Mile Beach, and the following day, 145 pilot whales died on Stewart Island. A transport agency contractor is being investigated for suspected fraud involving driver's licences and vehicle records. An agency spokesperson says the person was sacked as soon as serious concerns were identified earlier this month. He says they are working closely with the police on the case and have brought in investigators to determine the extent of the suspected fraud. And the man killed in an avalanche at Aoraki Mount Cook National Park yesterday was a 40-year-old Australian, Nathan Deutschbein. Mr Deutschbein and his two companions were climbing on Eugenie Glacier when the avalanche was triggered. A second person in the group escaped unhurt while the other suffered minor injuries. People in Oamaru are being warned to conserve water to avoid a boil water notice. Full water restrictions have been imposed on the North Otago town and surrounding areas after heavy rain put pressure on the water treatment plant. The Waitaki District Council says the treated supply could run out in 2 days without a big conservation effort. And that's the news.
Thank you. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Madison Reedy's just joined me in the studio to talk business. Financial Markets Authority has finished an investigation into Wynyard Group. Remind us who they are and what it was all about.
Wynyard Group is the crime-fighting security, or should I say was the crime-fighting security software company, and it did have some government contracts as well. It listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange in about 2013 mid-year. It then failed in 2016. When it failed, it had a market valuation of about $38.5 million. So it went into a trading halt, then subsequently voluntary administration by the directors, and it's now still currently in liquidation. It has gone bust. There's no money to pay any of its investors back. When it did go into that trading halt and it absolutely failed, that did come as a surprise to shareholders. So the Financial Markets Authority investigated as to why investors were shocked by that move, and it released 2 years later its investigation findings today. And what it found was that the company's announcements to the market and to investors were always pretty generally positive, and they actually had little financial information. And specifically when the finances turned ugly, those announcements relatively remained the same. They still remained pretty positive. Some of the examples they said today were Wynyard signs $27 million conditional agreement. Wynyard signs $2.8 million agreement with state policing agencies. So investors were, rather in the dark about this. The main issue that FMA did find, though, was that the board of directors did it actually withheld some critical information, particularly about its cash flow situation. They realised that it would could possibly turn cash flow negative by the end of 2016. What they actually did at the board meeting in September that year, they internally upgraded that risk level to extreme. The investors in the market were never told about that. And the FMA also isn't actually taking any legal action, again surprisingly, against any of the directors. They say that's because it lacks the evidence and also the resources to do so, and it doesn't think it would win in court. Now, I interviewed the FMA head of capital markets today, Garth Stanish, and I asked him if that was too soft.
The reality, as you say, is that no doubt there will be criticism. There are possibly criticisms from both sides of the spectrum. You know, there will be criticisms that we've been too hard or judgmental on the directors. There will be criticisms that we've been too soft, and we understand that. But like I say, we think this is the appropriate course of action in this particular case.
If this case isn't worth taking to court for all of those reasons that you've outlined, what then would be? How little would have to be disclosed to the market knowingly by directors? And how much investor money would have to be on the line and have to be lost for you to make a point of a case in court?
Look, I mean, that's a really abstract question, and and that's another reality of the regulation. Each particular case is its own particular set of facts, and we use a whole lot of criteria in terms of judging what we take forward and what we don't.
That's the FMA's Director of Capital Markets, Garth Stanish, explaining to me why the regulator isn't taking legal action against any of the directors of Wynyard Group, despite finding that they did breach some disclosure rules.
Yeah, interesting, because I don't think investors would find that an abstract concept. But anyway.
It's probably also worth noting that the directors of Wynyard did come out in response to that as well. They rejected and refuted all of those claims that the FMA made. They did say it's taken far too long for them to make this, but they are happy to have some closure.
Consumer confidence survey came out today. So how are we looking? What's the vibe heading into Christmas?
The vibe is better, but not great. So it's being described as now back at average levels. So it has bounced back. This is the ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Survey for the month of November. So this is kind of measured monthly.
But who wants to be average?
Well, no, we're just average, although that is better heading into Christmas. We have been, poor and pessimistic for the majority of the year. What is definitely a little bit more positive, and the bright light that kind of came out of this survey today, was that consumers' outlook is quite a bit more positive. So that's how they're feeling about how the economy is going to improve. So they think that, the 1,000 that were surveyed generally think that the economy is going to improve in the next year, and even more so in the next 5 years. And when you compare that to the business confidence survey that came out yesterday, there was quite a bit of a difference in that. That one hasn't bounced back. That's still sitting at rather pessimistic levels that we've been seeing for the past 3 months.
So can we anticipate from that people are still going to be out thrashing their credit cards and doing the Christmas shopping?
Well, I put that question to an economist today, and she said this is the chief economist of ANZ, Sharon Zollner. She said that it's really only historically average levels, and although it's improved and bounced back, they're not really going to go gung-ho in the malls heading into Christmas.
What's happened on the market today as well?
The NZX Top 50 Index closed up just 0.3%, so that's 29 points to close at 8,824. The New Zealand dollar's buying at 68.6 US cents, 93.8 to the Australian, and 53.7 against the British pence.
Thank you, Madison. Let's move now to forests, actually, trees. To fulfil its goal to plant 1 billion trees across New Zealand by 2028, the government is pledging $118 million towards helping landowners and organisations to plant trees. Another $120 million will go towards research initiatives to reduce the barriers to tree planting. Katie Todd was in the shearing shed in Canterbury where the announcement was made today.
In 2009, sheep and beef farmer Warwick James decided his property tucked into the Melbourne Hills was missing something. He has diversified to become a carbon farmer as well, and says he has never looked back.
Climate change is a real thing, and I believe with the 2050 deadline to sort of get to be carbon neutral is a very positive step towards the climate change. And trees are a big part of that, and I'm very pleased to be in the forefront with that.
Mr James is one of many from the agriculture sector supporting the creation of a 1 billion trees fund. Regional Development Minister Shane Jones today announced that the government will be giving grants of up to $4,000 per hectare to landowners and organisations who want to establish trees and native regeneration. The money will come from the Provincial Growth Fund. The government hopes the initiative will appeal to people who want to create more diversity on their land, reduce erosion, improve water quality and enhance biodiversity. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor says it's a step towards re-establishing New Zealand's largely forgotten forestry industry. But he says farmers do not need to worry about agriculture being replaced with forestry.
There's been a lot of really good work, detailed mapping work around this country, looking at farms, actually identifying on farm where there are places where it's logical to plant trees. And I support that. That'll help us with climate change, it'll help us with nutrient management, it'll help us with a mixed farming enterprise that gives us more diversity.
Mr Jones is open to landowners from different sectors, as long as they have the legal right to plant on the land and can make a long-term commitment to maintaining the planting project.
Who might be commercial, who might be recreational, who might be cultural, who in some cases see groves of trees as almost as a tapu thing, quite a sacred thing. You are all eligible to begin work and to find programs and meet us halfway, where we offer the government pūtea and you bring forward your land, and we meet the expectations that we were elected to fulfil: better land use management, smarter use of forestry.
Mr Jones said New Zealanders had already shown interest and goodwill in the 1 billion trees program, with 60 million trees planted since it launched. At a media stand-up, Mr Jones was quizzed on how landowners will be selected and what safeguards will be put in place to ensure the grants are distributed fairly.
After the Ngāti Hine experience of the mulching of the seedlings, I'm highly aware that there's a strong public probity test to pass, but I've got every confidence that the Ururako and the officials, they'll be monitoring it, the officials will be checking all applications, and there'll be sanctions. If people unwisely try and rort the scheme, then they'll be made to suffer for that.
The grants can be applied for year-round for the next 3 years. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd tēnei.
Meanwhile, the self-professed champion of the regions and Senior Minister Shane Jones says not everything he says in Parliament should be taken as fact. The ACT Party has called out Mr Jones for potentially bringing New Zealand on a collision course with the World Trade Organisation after flippant remarks in Parliament when defending his Provincial Growth Fund. It comes as concerns are raised that hidden agricultural subsidies in the fund could flout international trade laws. But despite Mr Jones's loose lips, the Prime Minister says she's not worried, and nor is the WTO. Here's our political reporter Jo Moyer.
On Tuesday, the ACT Party leader David Seymour used question time to ask Mr Jones whether he was aware some of the fund expenditure might have to be reported to the WTO, as it appeared to be agricultural subsidy in drag. Mr Jones says he has sought official advice and there's nothing to worry about, but admits he was called in by Economic Development and Trade Minister David Parker over his flippant comments that he wasn't bothered about the WTO because it's in a state of disarray.
I have been counselled by David Parker, my senior colleague, on several occasions. I am now much more aware of the importance of nuanced language, which will be a strange sensation for my good self.
He also says his colourful remarks shouldn't always be taken to be factually correct.
I would say, though, political banter in Parliament should not be construed as a state of fact. There are some political attacks from the ACT Party that somehow we're undermining our good name with international trade rules. That's silly and that's foolish, but I accept that these are matters of economic sensitivity.
Mr Seymour says the whole point of question time is to hold the government to account in an open forum.
What we're seeing here is a head-on collision between Shane Jones's folksy, rinky-dink, cavalier attitude to politics and the very serious reality that New Zealand, as a small trading nation, actually needs to be seen in good standing through organisations such as the World Trade Organisation.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she hasn't seen anything that would suggest the WTO is concerned the government is bringing in agricultural subsidies via the back door.
I've had advice that the PGF grants we've made do not sit counter to our trade agreements.
She wouldn't be drawn on whether Mr Jones's comments about the WTO were appropriate. But Chief Economist for the New Zealand Institute, Eric Crampton, says Mr Jones's approach suggests New Zealand can do what it likes.
That's just terrifying. It can throw away a lot of the really good work that we've had over the past decades from both National and Labour.
Mr Seymour says he has a lot of respect for Mr Parker and the job he has trying to hold the government together and keep Mr Jones in check. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jo Moyer.
A housing crisis in Lower Hutt is being exacerbated by people moving into the city from nearby Wellington in search of cheaper rents. Homelessness in the city has got so bad, almost half of Wellington Region's emergency housing grants are being paid to Lower Hutt. The council is trying to figure out how to fix it. Laura Dooney reports.
Nicole Gray was working full-time in Lower Hutt when she found herself homeless. She and her son, who's now 8, had to leave their home in August 2017. The 27-year-old, who was pregnant at the time, had to house hop among family and friends and stay at motels as emergency accommodation. She spent a lot of her time looking for somewhere to live.
They were way out of my budget for what was being offered as well. Like for a 2-bedroom house, back then it was like $300, and the quality of the house was still inadequate housing, which is still a form of homelessness as well, so it was pointless.
Ms Gray says she knew having one child and another on the way put her down the list compared to professional couples. She's since found somewhere to live, but says being homeless and a mother was hard.
It was real sad and painful because I did have children and I felt like I wasn't providing. So it kind of questioned my parenting then, when I was doing everything possible to give my kids everything, but I just felt like I kept failing.
Ms Gray's situation is not unique in Lower Hutt. Figures show the number of emergency accommodation grants paid in Lower Hutt has jumped from 348 last September to 600 this September. Trade Me figures show rents in the city rose 18% in the last year, more than anywhere else in the region. But the average rent there is still less than in Wellington, a 20-minute drive away. Wainoiomata Community Board member Kerry Brown has been helping families trying to find somewhere to call home. She's been at flat viewings where professionals from Wellington are given priorities over families.
I support them to get a rental, multiple bedrooms. Several families turn up, lots of families turn up. They will lose out, and they have lost out to childless couple in Wellington who's on a high income, and they may get a rental that's 3 bedrooms, whereas it could have gone to a family with children.
Ms Brown says many of those left without a home are surprised to find themselves in that situation.
Yeah, not only not working, but they're working as well. And they're unable to afford the new rents. The Hut has had a housing boom and the rents have increased. They are unable to get another rental.
The Hutt City Council is creating a strategy to deal with the increase of people without their own homes. A senior policy advisor at the Hutt City Council, John Pritchard, says the council has been looking closely at homelessness in Lower Hutt as it works out a strategy to fight it.
Homelessness in Lower Hutt is increasing, and that people remain homeless in emergency accommodation and in insecure and unsafe situations for extended periods of time. We've also found that homelessness and housing hardship affect a whole range of people in the city, including young people, families with children.
He says the message the council's been getting is that there are simply not enough houses. Social policy analyst for the Salvation Army, Alan Johnson, says cities nearby have the same demand for state housing.
For example, in Porirua City, there has been a similar increase in the last year as in Lower Hutt in terms of demand. In Upper Hutt City, there's been similar. So it's around 70 to 75% increase in the last 12 months. And that's well ahead of the national average, which is around 60%.
The Hutt City councillors have been given a report explaining what's happening in their city, and a strategy against homelessness will be discussed at a council meeting in December.
Laura Dooney with that report. If you're looking for a house in that area in Lower Hutt, let us know how difficult it is. We'd love to hear your story. You can email us at checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, text us 2101 on the text, or tweet us at checkpointrnz. Police in central Papua New Guinea say tribal violence has escalated to a humanitarian crisis. At least 7 people were killed in shootouts and revenge killings between 2 tribes in Enga province last week near the controversial Porgera gold mine. Thousands of residents have had to flee after their homes were burned down. Mackenzie Smith reports.
Police say the trouble started early last week with a drunken brawl in a club near the Porgera gold mine in Enga. Fighting between the Kandep and Paella tribes sharply escalated to a shootout where 2 people were killed. Local police commander Joseph Tondop says a retaliatory attack the same day killed 2 more.
It's just too many deaths and injuries and destruction of properties, not only in Pokhara, but it extended all the way down the highway down to Layagam. And we had a ambush. In the ambush the next day, 3 people died.
Mr. Tondop says many more were injured, but it's too early to tell the extent of the damage because a police investigation is ongoing.
Most of the people who are involved actually are traumatized. They're not readily available to give any statement, so we are in the process of investigating it now.
What is known is the fighting has uprooted entire communities in Enga. Mr. Tondop says around 3,000 people had their homes burned down and have been forced to flee. He says most of these people were illegal miners living near the Porgera mine in temporary settlements.
Because there are many people involved, it's like a humanitarian crisis now, so we are in the process of getting them evacuated or repatriated back to their provinces of Campground.
Mr. Tondop says the situation in Enga is back to normal this week and roads are clear. No arrests have been made so far, with police waiting on the outcome of the investigation. Local media report that police are appealing to Enga leaders to surrender suspects. For Checkpoint, Cor Mackenzie Smith, TNA.
It was hard to see the wood for the trees in Fiordland today after a historic viaduct reopened. More than 50 guests, including Conservation Minister Eugenie Sage, flew into the wilderness to mark the reopening of Percyburn Viaduct, which is believed to be the world's highest surviving wooden bridge. Once used to transport logs to Port Craig sawmill, the bridge is now part of 2 popular tramping tracks, including one that's been earmarked as a potential Great Walk. Our tourism reporter Tess Brunton took to the skies for the celebration.
Nestled in remote World Heritage Area in Fiordland stands a relic of a bygone era. Built nearly a century ago, the bridge was part of a logging and milling operation run out of Port Craig, a frontier town without road access. While Port Craig is now a ghost town, the Percyburn Viaduct provides a bridge between Fiordland's past and present. Nerita Dixon was part of Southland's Port Craig Viaducts Charitable Trust, which led the charge to restore the viaducts.
It astounds me because you've got to remember this was built in the 1920s, and when that was the wheelbarrow and the shovel era, and what they built this thing that's longer than a football field and higher than 6 stories building, with nothing like we've got today to use to building, and this is a wonderful creation.
Percyburn Viaduct has been closed to walkers since May 2013 due to safety concerns. Recognised by Heritage New Zealand, it survived neglect and arson before the latest transformation. Trust chairperson Tom Pride says it's been hard but rewarding to restore the viaducts over the past 25 years.
It hadn't had any restoration work done on it of any kind for 70 years. It was really, really dangerous. And if we hadn't restored it that year when we did in 1993, absolutely would have been demolished. They would have blown it up because it would have been too unsafe if it had been still in the same state.
Today, musicians played as guests wandered around the viaduct before being welcomed by a karakia, speeches and birdsong. The ceremonial ribbon was removed a bit earlier than expected when several trampers passed the bridge. Walking along the Percyburn Viaduct is not for the faint-hearted, standing 35 metres above the valley floor. But each year, about 4,000 people are expected to visit or pass over the bridge. And with the Hump Ridge track in the running to become a Department of Conservation Great Walk, visitor numbers are expected to rocket. Venture Southland's Steve Canny says the restored viaduct will hopefully boost their chances.
Dolphins, podocarp forest, tours and tarns in a subalpine setting, and the built history, our heritage, our industrial heritage as well. And the access along the south coast via the viaducts opens up all these possibilities.
Southland District Mayor Gary Tong was a policeman at nearby Tuatapere more than 14 years ago. He was closely linked to the setup of the Hump Ridge track and remembers time spent around the viaduct.
It's an icon for Southland. I've walked across it a number of times. The search and rescue, done a few things on there. Actually hovered a helicopter across the top of it one day to check on the tourist, and that's just an awesome piece of infrastructure around there.
The Trust, DOC and Southland District Council set up a partnership in 2015 to restore the 4 historic bridges in the area. The Percyburn Viaduct restoration alone cost about $750,000. Conservation Minister Eugenie Sage used the South Coast track when she tramped in the area in the late 1990s.
Waitutu is extraordinary. The forest, the marine terraces, the coast, the river systems, being able to hear and see kaka, it's a wonderful place. And the last light, it's the place of the longest day. Watching those sunsets at night in summer is extraordinary.
The final decision on the Hump Ridge Track's Great Walk status is expected to be announced in the next couple of months, with hopes the track will be ready for the 2021 season. In Fiordland for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton Tane.
And Tess took some great photos of the Percyburn Viaduct. If you want to check them out, they'll be up on our Facebook page and on the website too. They're worth a look. A class of primary school children whose homes were destroyed in the California fires has taken up residence in their teacher's house. Until their school is rebuilt, the children from Paradise have their maths lessons in the kitchen and their phys ed class is a run around the block. Colleague Luke has more.
School is in session in Chico, California, at teacher Sherry Eicher's house. The town's elementary school, along with thousands of other structures in Butte County, burned down in the devastating Camp Fire. So the lessons Eicher was teaching in a classroom are now being taught in her living room.
We're doing language arts, so they're learning their vocabulary words, their spelling words. We're doing sign language. We're studying planets this week. And the Milky Way. And tomorrow we'll be making sundials if we have sun. So we just started multiplications the day before the fire. So we're carrying on. We're just moving on.
6 times 5 equals 30. Good job.
And the kids like 8-year-old Eleanor Wedig don't seem to mind a bit.
I love it. It's like more comfortable than our classroom. The chairs are cushy. That's one thing that I like. And anyway, it's a house, so it's like more fancy and stuff. And she cooks us great lunches. Like every lunch I love.
And when it's time for recess, they take a run around the block.
CJ, can you give me an antonym for the word gradually?
Neither Sherry Eicher nor her students know when their school will be rebuilt, but they're learning an important lesson about dealing with challenges and making the best of what they have.
It was born on the streets of Kingston, Jamaica in the 1960s and reverberates around the world. Now, reggae music has been declared a cultural treasure and has been given protective status by the United Nations cultural body UNESCO. UNESCO says reggae acts as a voice for all and deserves to be promoted and protected. The BBC's Colin Patterson has the details.
Bob Marley. Toots and the Maytals, Bob and Marcia. Reggae music originated in Kingston, Jamaica in the 1960s, providing a voice to the marginalised. Now it's officially a cultural treasure worth protecting. That's according to the United Nations cultural organisation UNESCO, which says reggae contributes to the international discourse on issues of injustice, resistance, love and humanity. David Rodigan, a DJ and expert on reggae, is thrilled by the news.
I was astonished, but obviously delighted, because I've been a passionate and devout follower of the music since I was a teenager. And I've always said that it speaks for the underprivileged, it speaks out against social injustice. Reggae music is the original rebels music.
The UN's list of intangible world heritages to preserve has been going since 2008. Reggae's been added this year after Jamaica decided to apply for its inclusion. Now reggae music is one of the 503 global activities which the UN aims to promote nationally and internationally, including Egyptian hand puppetry, Peruvian scissor dancing and Turkish oil wrestling.
Did he say Turkish oil wrestling? And that was the BBC's Colin Patterson with that report. Bit of time for your feedback now. Regarding the whale stranding, we've had a few of these, but today in the Chathams they buried about 50 whales that died after stranding there. And Carolyn says, for goodness sake, we need to save whales from the Japanese fishers, not from Mother Nature. Get real, please, people. This was over the question of, it's our inclination to try and save these whales, but should we be trying? Should we just let nature take its course? Oamaru is staring down the barrel of a water shortage. People are being told to conserve. Bert says they had 240 millimetres of rainfall this month. That's 2.5 times the average monthly rainfall, says Bert. So how can they be running out of water? Good question.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. Some garages doing warrants of fitness are only being inspected once every few years. Figures released to Checkpoint reveal just 20 Transport Agency compliance officers are responsible for checking up on about 12,000 garages or people authorised to issue warrants. The head of the Motor Trade Association, Craig Pomari, told the program it's going to be tough for the agency to recruit more staff since there's already a shortage of about 2,000 qualified automotive technicians.
They actually physically need more people in there. We understand they're looking to employ a large number of additional auditors, but the issue we have there, Lisa, is one of them trying to find those people at the moment in an industry that's already struggling to find qualified automotive technicians.
Craig Pomari says most of his members say they typically see a compliance officer every 3 to 5 years, although one in Auckland has not been visited for 12 years. Meanwhile, a contractor for the Transport Agency is at the centre of an investigation into suspected fraud involving driver's licences and vehicle records. A spokesperson says serious concerns about the contractor's behaviour and actions were identified earlier this month, and the person was sacked within 24 hours. The agency has brought in forensic investigators to determine the extent of the suspected fraud and is still working with the police to establish all the facts. One of the 5 Tasman district councillors who voted against the Waimea Dam project says the community's limits have been exceeded, by today's decision. A council meeting of nearly 7 hours culminated in a vote of 9-5 in favour of the controversial project. Mark Greening spent 20 minutes trying to convince the council to take the $105 million scheme off what he described as life support.
This should not be an old boys club. You need to be able to put the cards down and walk away. We have exceeded our limits. You have exceeded the limit you agreed with your community. Your community are pleading for you to step away from this table.
Mark Greening, the decision, which caps almost 2 decades of planning, secures government funding through Crown Irrigation Investment and the Freshwater Improvement Fund. About 100 members of the nurses' organisation will go on strike for a day next month. Their negotiations for a collective agreement with the Family Planning Association have broken down. The members, who include nurses, community health promoters and medical administration staff, rejected the association's latest offer because it didn't address wage inequality. Spokesperson Chris Wilson says family planning needs more government funding, but the union's members shouldn't suffer as a result.
It certainly is a difficult situation for family planning, that's recognised, but our members have said that it's not appropriate for them to be propping up that valuable service.
Chris Wilson of the nurses' organisation there. 2 people have been charged with arson in the main street of Taupo early this morning. The fire badly damaged 3 shops in a commercial building in Tongariro Street just after 1 o'clock. Andrew McRae reports.
A 24-year-old man has been arrested in Auckland and will appear in court there tomorrow, while a 43-year-old woman will appear in the Taupo District Court. The police have acknowledged speculation in the town about who is responsible for the fire and have taken the unusual step of confirming that the 2 people arrested are not the building's owners. A scene examination is expected to continue tomorrow. The public are being advised to stay well clear as there are concerns about the structural safety of the building. Ko Andrew McRae.
The country's first online directory for veterans wanting assistance has been switched on today, called weserve.nz. It was launched by the Ranfurly Veterans Trust in collaboration with Veterans Affairs. It's a one-stop shop providing information from more than 30 organisations so far. The Trust's chairperson, David McGregor, says the idea came from a need to have an easily accessible website providing for the needs of veterans.
Initially, the
the emphasis has been on those organisations that are providing veteran health and welfare. But I see it long-term potential as socialising, if you like, those veterans post-Vietnam who've been lost to the system, in a sense.
David McGregor says eventually the site could be used to allow veterans to connect with former comrades and to socialise together. A Japan Airlines pilot who was found to be way over the alcohol limit just minutes before taking off from London last month has been jailed for 10 months. Security staff at Heathrow Airport noticed First Officer Katsuoshi Jitsukawa had glazed eyes and smelled strongly of alcohol. A breathalyzer test showed he was more than 10 times over the limit. His lawyer said his client used alcohol as a way of coping with long-haul flights and felt abject disgrace for his actions. The airline has sacked him. It's 6:05. To sport now, after a few lean years, a resurgent All Black Sevens team is determined to win back the World Series title. This season series kicks off this evening in Dubai. It's 4 years since New Zealand won the title, though they've won Commonwealth Games and World Cup gold medals in the interim. Co-captain Scott Curry says with the top 4 teams in the series this season qualifying for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, no games will be easy, but anything less than a World Series title won't suffice.
This year is all about qualifying for the Olympics, so a strong start here in Dubai will set us up well to hopefully go ahead and win the World Series, which is our aim this year.
Scott Curry. New Zealand play Wales, Spain and USA in pool play. The Australian National Basketball League has doubled down on its punishment for Breakers coach Kevin Braswell. He has copped a $1,000 fine for a tirade against unjust officiating during last Friday's loss to the Perth Wildcats in Auckland. A week ago, Braswell was penalised $500 for the same offence, albeit on a lesser scale, following the loss to Melbourne United in Invercargill. The former All Blacks prop, Wyatt Crockett, will captain the Barbarians against Argentina at Twickenham this weekend. Crockett, who retired from international rugby this year, will lead a side that includes 8 Springboks. And the former Silver Ferns mid-quarter and provincial netball coach Georgie Salter has died. She was 67. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the mercurial Elon Musk on a mission to save the world. New Zealander Hamish Mackenzie has worked for Tesla Motors and he's written a book about Musk's electric revolution. The Californian secession movement has gathered strength in the last couple of years. Can't imagine why. And the New Zealander who has led the National Health Service in Britain for the last 7 years, Sir Malcolm Grant. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now we have the short forecast from Med Service through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, that's including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taumarunui and Taupo. A few showers turning to rain with heavy falls from the north in Northland this afternoon or this evening, and from Auckland southeastwards tomorrow morning. Possible thunderstorms for Northland tomorrow. Taranaki through to Manawatu, also Taihape, Gisborne, all the way to Napier, to Wairarapa. Cloudy with a few showers, some heavy inland. Hortowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough, a few showers, some heavy this afternoon. Canterbury and eastern Otago, mainly fine but low cloud and patchy drizzle morning and night. Afternoon showers about Canterbury High Country, some heavy tomorrow. Southland and the remainder of Otago, cloudy periods. Showers during the afternoons and evenings, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms. Localised downpours possible for the rest of today. Fiordland, cloudy periods. Rain developing this evening, easing to isolated showers tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, it will be cloudy. It's nearly 6:08.
And you're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. One of Auckland's most well-known campgrounds will have to remove all of its cabins and caravans and could shut down altogether after a report into severe flooding at Piha earlier this year. If the Piha Domain campground does close down entirely, it will mean there is nowhere that people can camp near the famous surf beach, as the nearby Piha Mill camp also closed down due to flooding. Matthew Tunison reports.
The Piha community is reeling that its famous and much-loved campsite could be lost. The West Coast town was hit by devastating floods twice earlier this year, causing major damage. An Auckland Council report into the floods found the land to be unsafe, saying future floods could result in loss of life. Fiona Anderson, who has managed the Piha Domain campground for the past 19 years, says that means she can't insure the site from next April. She says she's got no choice but to remove all the cabins and caravans, some of which have been used by generations of Aucklanders.
We have this rich history
People have buried husbands, wives. There's been births, deaths, marriages and divorces. But it's over, right? It's over. The health and safety legislation trumps everything else. And I am not prepared to take the responsibility for someone losing their life if the big one comes. Nor am I prepared to pay the salvage costs for 40 caravans floating around in the tide.
Once she's removed the cabins and caravans, she'll have a year left on the lease, during which time she'll assess whether there's still a salvageable business. Ms Anderson says it's not clear whether people will still be able to put tents up after April the 1st, and she's not sure what it will mean for her home, which is also on the property.
In this place, I've raised a family in this house. I've fostered about 30 children in this house. We really are the Summer Bay Caravan Park, home and away.
Peter Gillespie and his family have been coming to their caravans at the campsite for the past 27 years.
Oh, it means it'll be the end of an era. My eldest son got killed in a plane crash down in Queenstown in 97, and we were told about it by the police whilst we were at Piha. Has, quite a poignant, significant place for us.
He believes the council's report overstates the risks of floods to the camping ground.
They've had floods, sure. Last year we had one that wasn't frightening by any means, and people said, "Oh, you've got the option of getting out there." We stayed and watched the waters come up, float over the road, but it never got anywhere threatening the caravans in the place.
Piha Cafe duty manager Tanya Milton says it's devastating for the Piha community.
It's actually really shocking because the businesses out here all really rely on each other and support each other. Absolutely devastated for Fiona at the campground. She pretty much is the backbone of the community. She does the ambulance, she does the food at the RSA, she does the campground, but she supports everybody around.
She says it'll mean only people who can afford more expensive accommodation will be able to stay the night at Piha.
I've been seeing the dynamic here change over the last few years so drastically with the Airbnbs, and I think the campground was really keeping it real. It kept Piha open as an accessible place for any kind of Auckland and not just the ones in the high income bracket.
Phil Wallace from the Piha Surf School says it's terrible news and is critical of Auckland Council.
What they're doing is they're knee-jerking, they're overreacting. This has a major effect on our community. They take $2 million a year in rates out of our community and they give very little back.
He blames council roadworks for increasing runoff into the river and its failure to properly maintain the waterway. Craig McElroy's team was behind the council's report into the floods. He says the council can't be blamed for the campground's woes.
This area has been a known floodplain, and it is not a function of the road or the maintenance of the stream. It's a function of the natural topography. It's very steep land, and as a consequence, when you get a heavy rainfall event, the water levels do rise very quickly. It's just a function of nature.
The council's report is being independently reviewed, and the results may have implications for the campground. In Auckland for Checkpoint, call Matthew Tunison, Tēnei.
A bombshell admission in court by Donald Trump's former personal lawyer has the storm clouds gathering once again for the president over suspected ties between his presidential campaign and Russia. Michael Cohen has pleaded guilty to making false statements to Congress over a deal to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. In contradicting his earlier evidence, he now says conversations about the deal, including with Russian President Vladimir Putin's press secretary, they continued well into the 2016 election season. And from Washington, the ABC's Connor Duffy has the story.
Michael Cohen was quick to slam his car door on reporters as he made the now familiar walk down the steps of the federal court in Manhattan. Inside, he made bombshell admissions, claiming he lied to Congress and downplayed contact with Russian officials. He said he did this to be consistent with President Trump's political messaging, which was that contact with Russian officials about plans for a Trump Tower in Moscow ended in January 2016, before his push for the Republican nomination. Within an hour of the court hearing, the president painted Cohen's admissions as the acts of a desperate criminal.
What he's trying to do, because he's a weak person and not a very smart person, he's got himself a big prison sentence, and he's trying to get a much lesser prison sentence by making up a story.
The court documents lodged by Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team paint a detailed picture of ongoing negotiations with Russia over the possible real estate deal. Cohen persisted on trying to make the deal until at least June of 2016. That's 6 months later than his sworn testimony to Congress. The president says he was well within his rights to keep negotiating deals through 2016.
When I run for president, that doesn't mean I'm not allowed to do business. I was doing a lot of different things when I was running. After I won, obviously, I don't do business.
Democrats were quick to seize on the revelations. Senator Mark Warner is the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
This is one more example of one of the president's closest allies lying about their ties to Russia and Russians. You had the president's personal lawyer still dealing on a Trump Tower project through the whole campaign, and it appears even into 2017.
In the House, Congressman Adam Schiff, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee, foreshadowed examining what other former and current Trump allies told the House.
We believe other witnesses were untruthful before our committee. We want to share those transcripts with Mr. Mueller.
What has been revealed shows that far from being a project that never got off the ground, the possibility of a Trump Tower in Moscow was discussed at length. The court documents show extensive negotiations, particularly between Cohen, Felix Sater, and representatives of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Just after the president took off in Air Force One, it was announced a planned meeting at the G20 with President Putin would not go ahead, with Ukraine cited as the reason.
And that's Connor Duffy there from Washington. Investors of collapsed Australian finance company Halifax say they're upset and depressed as they wait nervously for their funds. Sydney-based administrators appointed to Halifax Investment Services last week immediately froze investors' accounts. That included Kiwi investors in Halifax's local subsidiaries who've paid out tens of thousands of dollars and are worried the money was sent offshore to the ailing parent company. Madison Reedy reports.
Anger, frustration and disappointment. They're all feelings investors have traded through the broker Halifax are feeling as administrators scramble to find where their money's been sent overseas. The online trader Halifax New Zealand went into administration on Tuesday following its Australian parent company. Nearly 4,000 investor accounts have been frozen as administrators, lawyers and accountants in Australia try to locate their money and find out if it's in safe hands. The lead administrator of Halifax, Morgan Kelly from the firm Ferrier Hodgson, says it's no easy task, but he can't say much else.
We're unscrambling an omelette to a degree to work out how many New Zealand resident investors actually have a direct relationship with the Australian entity, so it's a little bit complicated.
How many trading platforms were Halifax investors' funds traded through by Halifax itself?
That's probably a level of detail that I'm not really comfortable with going through with you at the moment. This is one of the things that we're working through at the moment.
Can you give me a scale of how wide this spread internationally? Where was investors' money dotted around?
We're trying to work that out as well. We don't have a clear picture of that yet.
A currency broker in Tamahere, Andrew Mitcham, says the administrators haven't divulged enough information to investors so far. Mr Mitcham had $180,000 in his Halifax account. He sent them $40,000 just 3 weeks ago. He says he's shocked that Halifax could have traded some of his money offshore.
If that is the truth, that then becomes the very disappointing and shocking aspect of this, because myself and other people who invest with companies like Halifax or have our funds there so we can trade are on the understanding that the funds are in a completely segregated account, completely separate from the company itself.
How do you feel personally now that you believe your funds could be unsecure?
And again, I'm only hearing this for the first time, so if that is the case, then obviously very disappointed, and it suddenly becomes an issue of how much of our funds, what percentage we get back, and how much is going to disappear in admin, and when that may be, and whether even Halifax New Zealand may be bought out by another company and it carries on or not. We just don't know. We're up in the air and uncertain with that.
Another trader, Arup Nag from Palmerston North, had $10,000 in his Halifax account. He says he has no idea where his money was sent and he feels depressed and frustrated that he's been left in the dark.
Very disappointing, depressed, you can imagine.
Have you been in contact with Halifax, New Zealand, to ask them where your money is and if it's safe?
Yeah, I talked to the account manager, I talked to their support team over telephone, and none of them was of much help. No one could give me any concrete information. They just said that there is something going on in Australia, some meetings and all, but whether the money is safe, can be refunded or nothing.
Mr Nag is pointing the finger at regulators. The Financial Markets Authority issued Halifax a licence to trade the risky and speculative instruments called derivatives. The authority says it's keeping a close eye on the case and is receiving daily updates from the administrators. For Checkpoint, Madison Reedy.
The leaders of the world's 20 industrialised nations are arriving in Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires, ahead of the G20 summit over the weekend. The Leaders' Summit comes amid escalations in the trade war between the United States and China, a naval incident between Ukraine and Russia, and growing pressure on the Saudi Crown Prince, who is suspected of ordering the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Tensions ran high ahead of the scheduled meeting between Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, a meeting the US has now cancelled. And with no Trump-Putin meeting now on the agenda, the major focus shifts to the trade showdown between the US and China. CNN's Matt Rivers reports.
The knock on the G20 is that it's all for show. Handshakes, group photos, but nothing ever really happens. This year, though, the summit in Buenos Aires might be different.
But China wants to make a deal. If we can make a deal, we will.
With the U.S. and China locked in a trade war, President Trump and President Xi of China are scheduled to talk, and both sides are putting a ton of stock in that meeting.
It'll come to a head at the G20. I think that's the key point.
The message seems to be if the trade war can be stopped or at least put on hold, this meeting is the only place it could happen. And that's a big if.
Both sides are trying to manage expectation because it's unlikely that something dramatically successful will take place.
A U.S. trade representative report said this week China, quote, fundamentally has not altered its practices related to technology transfer, intellectual property, and innovation, things the U.S. has said must change. China rejected the report. And then there was the APEC summit, where Xi took a shot at the U.S.
History tells us to take the road of confrontation, whether it's in the form of a Cold War, open war, or trade war. It will produce no winners.
Just minutes later, Vice President Mike Pence fired back.
China's taken advantage of the United States for many, many years, and those days are over.
U.S. tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese imports are already in place, and hundreds of billions more could take effect next year. For its part, China has more tariffs ready of its own and says these U.S. actions are merely attempts to stifle its legitimate economic rise. It all makes an Argentina deal seem unlikely, but there is a wild card. Trump mentioned it at Mar-a-Lago, the property where he first met Xi.
I think I prepared for this meeting. I had a meeting literally right in that corner with President Xi. We have a great relationship. I like him a lot. I think he likes me.
Trump has always shown a willingness to make decisions in the moment, and perhaps he wants to make a deal. Xi might want the same. China's economy is swiftly slowing down, and a protracted trade war won't help. That's why this meeting is so important, and why this G20 could be a lot more than just a photo op.
Matt Rivers in Buenos Aires with that report. At least 6,000 students walked out of classrooms across Australia today in a mass strike over what they say is government inaction on climate change. The School Strike for Climate Action protest began with 3 pupils in Victoria and has spread across the nation. It comes at the end of a week where unprecedented bushfires swept across central Queensland and what should be the beginning of the rainy season. The ABC's Eleanor Whitehead spoke to student activists in Sydney today to find out what it's all about.
What do we want? Climate action! When do we want it? Now! What do we want?
It's being dubbed the Big School Walkout.
What do we want? Climate action! When do
Already this week, students have gone on strike in Hobart and Canberra. Today, thousands more will skip class to protest against inaction on climate change.
It terrifies me, honestly, the thought of what our future could become. The effects, they sound almost apocalyptic. And it's just this really disappointing feeling that nothing has been done before. We've known about this threat for so long.
Vivian Pardich is a 14-year-old student at Manly Selective Campus on Sydney's northern beaches. She helped organise today's strike and says the walkout is just the start of a youth campaign for action.
The most important thing is actually what happens after the strike, that we keep up MP pressure, that we keep making demands of our politicians, that they know that we're not giving up on our climate.
19-year-old Jackson Sievers is another student taking part. He's just graduated from high school and says he's tired of political inertia.
For the last couple of years, I've really seen our politicians really do nothing, and I've seen drought and drought after again, bushfire again, homes destroyed and people's lives just thrown away. And, politicians haven't been able to make the connection between the extreme weather that's going on and climate change. Unless we yell and shout and don't give up, I don't think they'll change their minds.
Event organisers say over 6,000 students will take part in today's strikes across the country. They take place just a day after the Indian energy giant Adani announced its controversial Carmichael mine in central Queensland would go ahead. Alex Fuller is spokesperson for the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, which helped organise the strikes. She says action is more important now than ever.
This announcement from Adani that they have secured finance makes it even more important for young people to really speak up for our politicians, to show leadership, to stop projects like the Adani coal mine.
On Tuesday, the Senate approved a motion to support the protests, but Prime Minister Scott Morrison delivered students a lecture.
We do not support our schools being turned into parliaments. What we want is more learning in schools and less activism in schools.
Vivian Pardich says that's only heightened her resolve.
It made me honestly quite angry to see that he didn't take it seriously, and we don't need to be activists if you're doing your job properly. That's the bottom line. Like, the reason we are out on the streets and skipping school is because we feel that strongly about something that you're not doing properly.
Eleanor Whitehead with that report from Sydney. HIV self-testing kits are being rolled out across Rwanda in a bid to beat the stigma of visiting a doctor. Results can take just 20 minutes and the test can be done at home. Sam Holder from Reuters reports.
In Rwanda, where 3% of the adult population has HIV, the arrival in pharmacies of a self-testing kit is welcome news. The process is simple, using a swab to take saliva samples, and the results can be processed at home in under 20 minutes.
Rwandans usually fear getting tested. They fear having to go to hospital. But I really like this kit because you can test yourself and know your status, and will even give people courage to go to hospital to find out more.
OraQuick is 99.7% accurate and requires no blood sample, and it avoids the usual stigma of getting tested. Many fear they'll be seen if they use normal medical centres. But although the price is low, it may still be too high in a country where 60% live in poverty.
The tests at the factory is accessed at $2 for public programs, $4 for non-public, for private. To me, looking at who needs it is still a major barrier to scale.
The kits, already available elsewhere in Africa, were being handed out for free in Rwanda in time for World AIDS Day. The hope is testing will be the first step for many towards getting proper treatment and slowing the spread of the virus.
And that's Sam Holder reporting there. Time for some of your feedback before we go. On Shane Jones and the $1 billion tree planting program, Gary says, you're talking about Shane Jones and the $1 billion trees. Get the farmers to grow marijuana as well, says Gary. Productivity-wise, you might get more marijuana per acre than cow meat. Interesting point, Gary. In fact, I have spoken to Shane Jones about this before. He ain't so keen on using some of that provincial growth fund to support support projects growing marijuana, but he may have changed his position. On the housing crisis in Lower Hutt being exacerbated by people moving there from Wellington looking for cheaper rent. This from Doug. Doug says the Wellington urban area includes Wellington City and 3 other city councils, including Lower Hutt. But it has the same population as Christchurch, says Doug. So why does it have 4 housing strategies, let alone 4 councils? It is one continuous urban area and people should treat it as one, he says. So why doesn't local council reflect this? And just before we go, tonight, little known fact, the Checkpoint Lawn Bowls and Petanque Championship. If it goes well, check it out on our social media. We'll let you know. If it goes badly, we will never speak of it again. So whatever you are doing this weekend, have fun doing it. That is Checkpoint for this evening. We do appreciate you joining us on radio, on television, online, or however you chose to connect with us today. You can catch up on our stories tonight on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint or on our Facebook page for all the latest news, information, feature stories from New Zealand and around the world. Go to radionewzealand.co.nz, our homepage. So from me, Lisa Owen, and the Checkpoint team, have a great night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. It's emerged the Transport Agency has only 20 officers to check up on the 12,000 garages or technicians who issue warrants of fitness, and the Motor Trade Association says the agency will struggle to recruit more auditors. One of the 5 Tasman district councillors who voted against the Waimea Dam project says today's decision to go ahead with the dam exceeds the community's limits. Retirement Commissioner Diane Maxwell has been accused of bullying 2 weeks after she was told her contract would not be renewed in June. 100 members of the nurses' organisation who work for the Family Planning Association have announced a one-day strike next month. And people in Oamaru may have to boil water if they don't conserve enough over the weekend, with the town storage tank now only 20% full. Our next news and weather will be at 7.
Country Life this week, here's how employers are snapping up ag students from Waitaki Boys High School.
They ring me and say, have you got anyone? And I said, well, the